All right, so chapters 5 and 6 were very dense for a couple reasons. One, I think there's just a lot to cover. And two, it took me a while to wrap my mind around the stuff in chapters 5 and 6. And then three, part of the reason there's so many videos, well, one of them was, again, it just took me a while to understand some of these concepts, but the other part of it is that you kind of I wanted to record things from different angles sometimes. So there's just kind of a lot to unpack, and so I'm going to make while I think you should watch all the videos, I'm going to preface the videos with some of the key concepts that you need to be aware of, so that as you work through the videos, you'll be able to see them more clearly and understand what's going on. So the first thing we're going to start with is Rene talks about, I'm going to adjust the angle of this. So he talks about playing from the string, meaning really planting. Versus playing through the string, which is where you don't make contact and pluck, but you just sort of brush through it. And it's kind of subtle in a certain way, but again, you just kind of want to think, am I really establishing contact and then plucking, or am I just sort of, using the least amount of time possible when I'm in contact with the string with the tip of my finger? The other thing he talks about is whether or not you bend this tip joint in the stroke or not, especially in free stroke. Doing so or not doing so affects both the tone and speed. Generally speaking, keeping that joint stiff will give you a more percussive sound and allow you to move a little bit faster through the string and thus play, scales and other material faster. He also talks about playing off the left, center, or right side of the nail. That is done by how you position the hand using the shoulder to arm joint. So if I want to play more off the right side, I kind of roll over slightly. And also some forearm rotation too, and also the setup of the guitar. As you move the guitar up and down, it's going to change. If I keep my finger constant but shift the guitar, well, now I've completely changed the angle, whereas if I bring it all the way up here, I've become more off the center or even more off the left side of the nail. But it's going to be a combination of your positioning of the guitar and then your positioning of the arm and the fingers with the shoulder to arm joint. And then maybe a certain amount of passive forearm rotation that comes about through the positioning and gravity. But he talks about playing off the right side of the nail, the center of the nail like John Williams, and then the left side of the nail. And those are kind of the big things. He also mentions too how sometimes the fingertip joint bends, but the I finger does not, because the M finger is longer. And so while you may be able to keep I finger from bending, because M is so much longer, it bends a little bit when they're paired together like this. And then he mentions that playing through the string primarily applies to free stroke. Dolce and Panicello, we didn't explicitly articulate in there. It's pretty common knowledge, but I will bring that up in this video now. Dolce is playing, towards the soundboard with a sewn hole, and gives you a darker tone. And as you shift around, you're going to get a variety of different tones. That's very different than, say, here. And then you'll often see Rene play here, kind of behind the sound hole. I haven't really talked to him about that yet, but I think it has to do with the resistance of the string at that point. The string is a little bit more tense here than it is here, so that might help for speed, facilitate speed. And then there's Ponticello down here. And then the spectrum in between Ponticello and Dolce. You kind of have normal, which is either, varying degrees over or behind the sound hole. Kind of around this area is what I'm going to roughly call normal. You have Ponticello, which is close to the bridge. And then you have Dolce up in this region and even a bit over the sound hole as well. Form, rotation, gravity, especially the wrist. One thing you want to keep in mind is that there is a balance, and Rene talks about this in one of the videos. There is a balance that needs to be had between volume and speed. So if I'm really digging in to the strings, I can get the loudest possible volume, but there's going to be a limit to how much speed I can get. So one of the things you're going to want to practice, whether it's rest or free stroke, is kind of finding what's the fastest when you're doing like speed bursts and fast scales. What's that balance based on my guitar and my body? And it's going to be a little bit different for everybody based on those two factors, because some guitars are by default a little bit louder than others. An inexpensive Yamaha is going to be quieter probably and have a different tone than a hand-built guitar such as mine or one of Rene's or someone winning the GFA. But you're going to want to kind of figure out like, where is that balance between speed and volume? And one way to do that is to do really loud volume, either with your rest or free stroke, and then feel your fingers for tension all over, up in the finger. Since the muscles that operate on the wrists or on the fingers are in the forearm, you kind of want to feel from the forearm to the wrist, to the top of the wrist, to the palm, to especially the fingers themselves, and see like, how can I get the most volume possible with the least amount of tension? And if you're feeling some tension, see if you can eliminate it. Try to go from one joint to the next. Feel around this joint, feel around this joint, feel around this joint. Sorry, I'm going to make it a little visible. Feel around the tip joint, the center joint, the knuckle joint, center joint, knuckle joint, wrist, forearm, and feel for where the tension is. And see like, can I get the same volume but with less tension but the same speed? So you want to keep speed and volume constant and then try to reduce the tension. And if you can't reduce the tension, then it means you need to drop the volume down a little bit until you're getting no tension. And it's going to be different for everybody based on their angle of attack, the guitar, their body, all these different variables. If I was going to define talent in guitar, one of the things is being someone like Rene or Grisha, who can play as fast as they can. And if you watch the video of me playing Fly Me doing the improvisation of Fly Me to the Moon, my rest and free was pretty fast in that video, whether it's arpeggio or in scales. I'm still having troubles making that consistent. So this is a process and it takes time. And the more self-awareness and control you develop, the easier it will end up being, and the more consistency you'll see in your sound and your playing. And so again, kind of the idea is keep volume and tone and angle of attack consistent, and then go for your loudest volume, and then feel your hands and try to eliminate tension at that loud volume. And if you can't eliminate tension, then pull back on volume slightly, because same with rest stroke. The other thing is you want to feel the resistance of the string and its relationship to tension. So I would try different spots, like how tense does it feel for your fingers to play? And is the string really loose? Does it flop around here? And then how is that different from over here and over here and down here? I think one of the reasons the flamencos play kind of in this area is that there's more resistance to the string. And so while it has a musical effect, it gets a sound that's good for flamenco. It also has a physical or technical aspect in that the strings are stiffer, so that it's easier to play faster. But you want to make this connection between the feeling of your fingertip on the string, the resistance of the string, the volume and tone you get, and the tension. So in other words, you want to be feeling your fingers in your hand and feeling like, what's the tension I'm getting and what's the relation to the sound, and then how does that relate to speed? Like if I am really forcing it in, my fingers are going to flop all over the place. It's going to be, not as good. But if I get that right balance, see if I can do it now for this video. Not bad for the first time of the day. And again, that was kind of about just not pushing in as much, but just finding the least amount of muscle necessary to displace the string to get a nice, good sound, quality tone, and a loud volume. And if I have to, in order to reduce that tension in the hand and fingers, I'm going to reduce the volume a little bit. So that's one of the key concepts. This is also true for guitar picking. I don't have a guitar pick on me. Hold on, let me grab one. So this is one concept that radically changed my guitar picking, and if you look at the 16th note runs I'm doing in Harlem Nocturne or How Deep is the Ocean, it was all basically finding the... And you're going to sacrifice some volume, because if you're really picking, you're going to feel some tension in your forearm and your elbow and upper arm, because you're just going too much. You want to find... like the least amount that you need from the elbow and maybe a little bit of wrist, either engaged or simply along for the ride with the elbow. To get the sound that you want. The nice thing about electric guitar is with electric guitar you have amplification. So your concern is a little bit less about the tone and the volume relative to classical guitar in your plucking. That's more handled by the electronics and the amplifier and the speaker and the preamp and all that stuff, relatively speaking. You're going to be worried about making your motion concise and not too much muscle so that you're getting speed. I distinctly remember in like January and February when I made that connection. This is of 2024. And as I internalized that feeling, it just changed. I mean, the 16 note runs you're seeing in those videos, I couldn't do that in November or December of 2023. So as you learn to find the least amount of muscle work and to really feel, because this picking motion is driven by the elbow mainly. And so you want to, and the elbow muscles are in the upper arm. So you want to feel your upper arm around your elbow. Also feel some tension in the forearm. Also make sure there isn't, as you're plucking, any forearm rotation. So some of the tension is holding the forearm and keeping it stable. But the other part of the tension is keeping the forearm from rotating so that once you've kind of picked your angle, you can just kind of play. And I think when we talk about engagement later, that's one of the things Rene is talking about when he says keeping the forearm tense, but we're not quite to engagement yet. So let me keep looking at my notes here. Shoulder arm joint and gravity, videos, limb support strokes. We talk a little bit about limb supported strokes, but we're not going to do that actually in this video. Nail length and size of guitar. We kind of talked about this earlier, but just to reiterate, both your nail length and the guitar setup are going to have an impact on all the factors we've discussed, and the type of setup. You know, if you sit in a different flamenco posture, there's just going to be a different angle of attack. You know, I kind of have to, if you watch Paco de Lucia, when he wants to switch from like chord playing to playing rest stroke, he makes a pretty big move from playing like here to here. And that's in no small part because of his setup. So all that to say, to illustrate the point that your setup does impact how you move to get to where you want to be. Let's see here. Rest and free stroke, different presentation, single alternating finger. So what I would do to work on this kind of stuff is do like the beginning exercise in Ricardo Iznaola's Guitar Logos, where there's no left hand involved, and you just work on plucking one finger at a time and trying to get the most volume that you can with the least amount of tension. And doing each finger, and then doing finger alternations. And the ones you're going to be doing are IM and MI, and then IA and AI, and then MA and AM. And of course you'll do different strings as well. And you can try different presentations, like you can go more straight, or more off the left side, some more Segovia, or more John Williams, or more David Russell, and kind of experiment with the different sounds and what feels comfortable to you. And as you're doing that, you can play around with different postures. You can kind of go more traditional classical. You could try doing flamenco either with the leg up or not the leg up, and just sort of feel everything. Feel your fingers. And again, what you want to do is alternate your attention, because you can't pay attention to your entire body at once. So what you're going to want to do is start with your posture and say, like, how are my hips? Are my hips good? Okay, I think my posture is good. One of the problems I had is that I was kind of leaning, rotating and leaning towards the guitar, and I was getting some pain in my back and sides. So when I finally just went, okay, is my posture good? Oh no, that's not good. Let me fix that. Okay, that's good. And then are my shoulders elevated? Okay, shoulders are not elevated. Now I'm good. Okay, how's my shoulder to arm joint feel? How's my elbow feel? How's the forearm rotation? Where is my forearm at? Is it like way down here, or is it just nice and relaxed? Where's my wrist? Is it up? Is it down? How are my fingers? Do I feel a lot of tension from this motion? Can I get more volume? And this idea of alternating attention comes from Jamie Andreas's book. She uses the term rotating attention. I want to give her credit for that, as it's a big deal. It's one of the biggest tools we use in this book. And when I ran this past Kevin Lowe, he was like, I've never heard somebody put it like that before, but yeah, that's what you do. You can't focus on everything at once. So you need to, alternate what it is you are paying attention to, so you can focus on each individual aspect, whether it's tone production, angle of attack, the forearm, tension, whatever. I'm going to use the phrase alternating attention moving forward. Out of respect for Jamie Andreas, I don't want to steal her stuff, so I want to give her credit, but also use a different terminology. There's going to be rest stroke and free stroke, different presentations, single finger and alternating finger, and you want to kind of make sure that the contact point with your fingertip is consistent. So once you've chosen a setup that you like, then you can then you want to make sure that you're being consistent with that. You don't want to keep constantly changing your setup. You want to experiment with different ones and stay there for a while, like maybe Segovia for a bit, John Williams for a bit, David Russell for a bit. But once you've decided on the setup and the angle of attack, you want to stick with it. Now, there can be some benefit in switching between them sometimes. I like to go from flamenco to my more elevated classical pose, partly because I play both styles of music, but also because I find that sometimes solving a problem in one area informs the way that I then solve it in another posture. But I do keep some consistency for a period of time when practicing. One of the things that Kevin and Rene and I discussed in one of the videos is a couple different ways of practicing. One is starting out slow and really mastering the movement. And really watching the fingers and making sure that, and really feeling the fingers and making sure that you're getting a good, nice, loud sound with good tone production. Either doing staccato to really emphasize the planting, or doing legato. So practicing slow is one way. Another way is raising the tempo up with the metronome, and then when you start to notice a lot of tension and problems, you bring the metronome down 10 to 40% and try to fix those problems. Another way, which has been the biggest thing that's helped me in my time in the last 6 months, is keeping it fast, but observing and alternating my attention. So I feel the fingers, and I think about the tip joint, the middle joint, the knuckle joint, and then I feel the top of the wrist, the palm, the thumb, the wrist, both deviation and flexion. Where's my forearm rotation at? How does my elbow and shoulder to arm joint feel? How do the muscles feel in the upper arm and in the upper chest, shoulders and back? I'm constantly alternating my attention and feeling and trying to get rid of that attention. So I'm like, oh, I noticed that my wrist is really high. Well, let me bring that down so it feels relaxed. And the way you find your center is by feeling a lot of tension. So I might do, a really exaggerated flexed wrist so that I really feel the tension, and on the top of the hand, the skin stretching and the muscular exertion. And then I might keep plucking and keep at speed until I get it back to zero in its neutral range, because at the center of its range of motion is where you're going to have the least amount of tension. So to kind of summarize that, the idea is that rather than practicing slowly or finding problems and reducing your speed, you try to rotate your attention and reduce the tension and refine the movement while at speed. So you don't just practice fast, you stay at a fast speed, but you try to feel and refine your movements. There's so much emphasis on practicing slowly in classical guitar that I think this is a big secret that needs to get out into the world. I'm convinced of it. It's done more for my playing in the last 6 months than any single technique for practicing I can tell you, is being at a fast speed, alternating my tension and refining my movements and getting rid of tension and looking at, I break down to 3 things. One is refining your movement, one is feeling and eliminating tension, and one is finding your setup. And by that I mean that, like, not only am I feeling that there's tension here, but there's also sort of a setup that I can see. You know, I feel to get my wrist to where it needs to be, but I do also know what it looks like, and I can see it in other people's hands too. Let's see here. Another thing that we talk about is that when you're playing a piece like Agustín Barrios, even though it's invisible, and you want to be careful with this concept, because when you're talking about starting to use the wrist and the elbow and the and forearm rotation and the shoulder to arm joint in your playing, it's really easy to overdo it. You want to first learn to be able to do techniques at a slower tempo and in less complicated situations with just the fingers. And then as you start to be ready for greater speed, then you can start incorporating these larger joints and muscles into either helping you with speed or navigating more complicated situations. So in a piece like the Barrios, there's all these movements to help the thumb, so that when the thumb is done plucking, when it relaxes, it's right where it needs to be to pluck that string again, assuming I'm going to repeat that same string over and over again. Same for all the other fingers. In other words, you're going to kind of aid the thumb and the fingers a little bit with the shoulder to arm joint and the elbow and forearm rotation. And it's almost invisible, especially when you're looking from this angle, but if you watch, like when I went up here, I aided just a little bit with the elbow and the shoulder to arm joint. You can see the motion up here. There's like all these little elbow movements just to kind of help things get to where they need to be. Now, I'm exaggerating for this video, and while I'm not an expert on this subject, you want to observe other virtuosos, and you really want to be careful that you're not overdoing it, because for as valuable as this arm stuff is, Carlavaro calls this in his method fijación, F-I-J-A-C-I-O-N, and he uses the phrase hand-arm complex and says you got to consider the whole hand and arm, not just the fingers, when working on guitar technique. And this is what he's getting at, but it can become a dangerous concept to a beginner because they tend to overdo it. But it is present in everything, and it's oftentimes a lot of elbow or shoulder to arm joint. So like, then I use just a little bit of elbow to help get to the A string, and then a little bit of elbow back to get the A finger up to the high E string. Elbow to the thumb, then elbow for the ring finger, then elbow. So those are some pretty important concepts that you want to watch out for. The other thing that Rene talks about too is the thumbnail. So if you find that your thumbnail is getting caught when you have a more relaxed and lowered wrist, and so what ends up happening is a lot of times people kind of raise the arm, the forearm, like they do this sort of seesaw movement, and they raise it up so that they can dig in more with the thumb, which is actually a useful technique in flamenco when you're doing really heavy thumb lines or alzapua. But for most of the time, it's not necessary, and in fact impedes your ability to move the fingers, because once you flex the wrist, you limit the mobility of the fingers. And so basically the idea is that you want to make sure that if you're catching with your thumb stroke, that you file down the left side of your thumbnail so that you're no longer catching. And then you'll be able to play thumb with a lowered wrist without any issues. This is a big problem for me when I first came to Milwaukee and was learning from Rene. Let's see here. So just to reiterate one more time, you'll want to practice all this concepts on on single strings, doing individual fingers, and then different alternations. So the single fingers are going to be I, M, A, and then the alternations, and then P. And then the alternations are going to be P-I, I-P, P-M, M-P, P-A, A-P, I-M, M-I, M-A, A-M. You're going to want to do free and rest stroke. You're going to want to do different presentations. You're going to want to do planting and from the string. You're going to want to do letting the tip joint bend versus keeping it stiff when plucking. And you're going to want to do different spacings for the thumb. So, P-I. Actually, not for this one. For now, you'll just keep it on one string. So P-I, I-M. And then I would also do A-M-I. It will help with tremolo, and also sometimes in certain passages doing AMI can distribute the load amongst 3 fingers instead of 2. And that is pretty much everything for this part. Thank you for your time.